every NBA player is a freak athlete compared to your everyday person, but when you get to the players that can even stand out from the best athletes in the world, it's what makes them real freak of natures by any means. And we're talking players that have insane athleticism they just shouldn't, or that are able to do things that shouldn't be humanly possible for their size. So this is the best from every team. For the Nets, it's obviously Kevin Durant. Kevin has the height of an NBA center, but the skill set of a guard. He's definitely not the best athlete. He was a flop in the combine, isn't super strong, and only has a 33-inch vertical, but the fact that he's 7 foot tall, agile, and is one of the greatest shooters in NBA history truly makes him a freak of nature. The fact that he just straight up shoots a normal jump shot and it's nearly unblockable and can't even be altered is a huge part of what makes him unstoppable. But combine that with the fact that he can cross up the league's best players, and it's why he's the best player in the NBA today. Then the spot for the Bucks goes to Giannis. And let's be honest, without his size and strength, Antetokounmpo wouldn't be nearly the player he is today, but that's the advantages of being a freak of nature. He was drafted as a 6'8", 190-pound small forward. Today he's 6'11" and 240, nearly the same size as prime Dwight Howard. But Giannis plays power forward. His 7'3" wingspan allows him to get down the entire court in 3 dribbles and play lockdown defense. And if you thought Kawhi Leonard's hands were big, the average male adult's hands are 7 inches long. Well, Giannis's are 12 inches, the size of a ruler. Oh yeah, and he has a 40-inch vertical too. The Celtics didn't have anyone too crazy, so we're just gonna give this one a Taco Fall. There's nothing too freakish about him aside from the fact that he's 7'5". He's not super quick, athletic, or anything else, but it was the best we had for Boston. On the other hand, we have Michael Jordan for the Chicago Bulls. And for MJ, he had the non-stop defense and the 46-inch vertical that at times made him look like he was floating. Magic Johnson said he remembers playing against Jordan and seeing him jump, then the other player jump, the other player then starts coming back down, and Michael still hadn't reached the peak of his jump yet. And combine that with his agility to move any way he needed to on the court was what allowed him to do some of the craziest dunks that he did. But that's not even to mention, he was a freak of nature in the way he thinks too, and how competitive he was and still is. Nobody in the history of the game was as mentally strong and a competitor like Jordan was. For the Miami Heat, we have LeBron, and LeBron's similar in that he's head and shoulders above everyone else, physically and mentally. But he's also more durable than 99% of players in NBA history. He's going into year 19 as one of the top players in the NBA. He's 6'9", 260 pounds of muscle at small forward. He has the ability to play and guard all 5 positions, and he's got one of the greatest basketball minds ever. His IQ to read other teams' plays, remember each and every play of the game, and always make the right play prove that. So he's got every aspect of being a freak of nature covered. Now Dwight Howard for the Orlando Magic was always slightly undersized for a center, but he made up for it in other aspects. He's 6'10", 260, but during his prime, he was still by far the strongest center in the NBA, had freakish athleticism, but also a 40-inch vertical leap. So we had the best center in the league, able to jump as high as LeBron James. No wonder he was so good back then. For the Cavs, I tried to not put any repeats, but they really had no one else, so I had to give this one to LeBron James too. The Pistons, on the other hand, had someone new in Dennis Rodman. And let's be honest, not even counting on the court, he's a freak just for the fact that he went from 5'10" to 6'7" at 21 years old. Who even does that? But that's what gave him the ability to be different than everyone else in NBA history. He had a unique growth spurt that gave him the work ethic and ability of a 5'10" person, going for rebounds, except now he was the size of an NBA power forward. And when we talk about freaks of nature, the Hawks and Spud Webb don't get talked about enough. But for a grown man to be 5'7", 130 pounds and make it into the NBA is something special. And for that same man to have a 46-inch vertical and have won the dunk contest is just out of this world. He was never a fantastic NBA player, but he did average 16 a game one season, which would translate to like 45 points a game if we measured points per square inch of his body. And speaking of smaller players, Nate Robinson takes the Knicks spot, and he was a completely different animal than Spud Webb. Spud looked like a kid on the court at times, but Nate looked and played like a mini LeBron James in an average sized body. And at 5'9", he had a 43-inch vertical leap, which gave him a lot more freakish moments, winning 3 dunk contests, blocking Yao Ming, and getting knocked out, just to name a few. Then of course Vince Carter takes the spot for the Raptors, who, by my meaning of the term, I wouldn't necessarily say he was a freak of nature. He did some superhuman things and had some freakish athleticism though, so he was the closest thing Toronto had to it. No one will forget the 2000 dunk contest that was way ahead of its time, or the dunk over Frederick Weiss, which easily gives him the spot over any other Raptors player. And Paul George is another, but for the Pacers. Not a freak of nature, but the closest thing Indiana had to it. For the Golden State Warriors, we could give it to Kevin Durant, but even he was no match for Wilt Chamberlain, who makes an argument for the biggest freak of nature in NBA history. And even makes an argument for this spot across any sport. It put him on another planet to have more strength than Shaq, more agility than Dwight Howard, and a higher vertical than Michael Jordan. That doesn't even sound real, but if all the rumors around him were true, he truly was not from this planet. Now for Philly, AI wasn't a real freak of nature. He was just extremely athletic and explosive for his size. He became an all-time great and competed with the best of the best because of it. And I also could have given this spot to Wilt Chamberlain too. I could have given him the spot for any team he played on, but just to avoid having him as a repeat everywhere, and to mix it up, I had to give the shout out to Iverson. Now for the Wizards, we have Manute Bol. So Manute wasn't much of an athlete at all due to his size, but just the fact that he was 7.5 feet tall and only weighed 200 pounds by human standards made him a freak of nature all on its own. But on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Hornets with Muggsy Bogues. Muggsy Bogues was 5'3" tall. 5'3", the height of your average American woman. He only averaged double digits 3 times in his career, but he's 5'3". Do you understand how crazy that is? We think it's crazy when Isaiah Thomas or Nate Robinson are able to play in the NBA, but Muggsy was half a foot shorter. Then going back to the other side of the spectrum, this Lakers spot goes to Shaq. It could have gone to Wilt Chamberlain or Magic Johnson, but Shaq deserved this one because we already used Wilt, and Shaq's a bigger freak of nature than Magic was, because he was a 7'1" man that weighed 350 pounds with a 42-inch vertical. During his Orlando days, he ripped down backboards and he was a monster, but he put on so much more size while maintaining athleticism in LA. Kawhi Leonard for the Clippers though has some freaky length. He stands at 6'7" but has a 7'3" wingspan and hands that measure almost a foot long. But if we want to talk about wingspan, we got to talk about the Jazz and Rudy Gobert, who's 7'1" but has a 7'8" wingspan. That's the 6th largest in NBA history, even though he's definitely not the 6th tallest player we've ever had. I considered Mark Eden for this spot, but I mean, he was kinda just tall. Now just like his father, Bol takes the spot for an NBA team for the Nuggets. He got most of Manute's height, but grew up learning how to play it like a perimeter player, and now he's like a very light Kevin Durant on the court. And speaking of someone who's a light version of someone else, it brings us to the Blazers and Clyde Drexler, who was always overshadowed by Michael Jordan, but on the court they were very identical athletically. For the Dallas Mavericks, we have Kristaps Porzingis, who I have talked about in the past and why he truly is a freak of nature. He's not the fastest, not the strongest, but he's 7'3" and has a vertical 2 inches higher than prime Blake Griffin at 37.5 inches. The Timberwolves really didn't have anyone, so I could have given it to Andrew Wiggins or Zach LaVine, and I'm going with Zach. He's 6'5" with a 46-inch vertical leap and has been able to do some of the greatest dunks we've ever seen in the dunk contest, making him arguably the greatest dunker in NBA history. Then we have the Pelicans with Zion Williamson, and I don't need to say much. 6'6", 280 pounds of muscle sometimes, but a 45-inch vertical. Nearly the same exact as Zach LaVine, and it just doesn't seem humanly possible at times. A near 300-pound power forward shouldn't be able to jump like he can. Sacramento didn't really have anyone, so we just gave it to Oscar Robertson, and he kind of deserves it. He was way ahead of his time and super athletic for back when he played. He was a 6'5" point guard and unlike anyone else in the league at the time. For the Spurs, we have Dennis Rodman. I know we already used him, but there really wasn't anyone else. For the OKC Thunder though, the spot goes to Russell Westbrook, who's one of the most unique freaks of nature really ever. He only has a 36-inch vertical, average by NBA standards, and none of his other stats were too impressive on paper at the combine. On paper, he was just an average player, but then you see him in person and realize he's one of the most athletic point guards, maybe the most athletic to ever play the game. He's got the speed, strength, and explosiveness that most players only dream of having. Next up, it's the Rockets with Yao Ming. He stood at 7'6" and was extremely agile for his size, but it gets even more impressive the deeper you dig into it. His mother was 6'3", his father was 6'7". He was born at 11 pounds, twice the size of your average Chinese newborn. And in his early days, he had a 32-inch vertical, but it was lowered to 26 inches after a couple of foot injuries before he ever got into the NBA. So imagine if Yao Ming was able to jump 6 inches higher. The Memphis Grizzlies are the newest franchise in the league, so they really didn't have a freak of nature, but we can give it to Ja Morant. Then for the Phoenix Suns, Charles Barkley takes it, who was an undersized power forward at 6'6", who was still able to dominate and be a superstar in the league. He was one of the league's best power forwards and still managed to average 28 a game and take his team to the finals in 2 different seasons. And he was able to do all of this while eating a fish fillet sandwich and a Diet Coke before every single NBA game. You gotta be some sort of special to be able to do that.